Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. And thank you very much for coming, because I know like AI is the shiny toy and everybody wants to be in the AI sessions, but I'm telling you this is way more interesting than AI. And I can tell you because I spent 25 years building AI technology for IBM research. And actually I built my first smart assistant back in 2008. So I've been building language models and semantic models and network analysis, long before we had the LLMs that we see today. So everybody kind of thinks, am I mad? Like, why did I jumped out of AI about 8 years ago, just as it was starting to heat up. And everybody say, like, why in heck would you get out of AI just when it starts to get interesting? And that was because, to be honest with you, I think what we're doing right now is actually more interesting. And why is it more interesting? Having spent about 20 years doing this AI research work, there was a few things that became really evident to me. And there's two of them that were the most concerning for me, as both a citizen of the world and as a technology person who had literally built a lot of this original AI technology. So anybody who's familiar with IBM Watson, I built some of the original NLP that underpinned the Watson system. And the two things that I was concerned about was, one is the ethics of AI. What was going to happen and how were we going to ensure that AI is working for the benefit of citizens around the world, for all of us, and how can we ensure that AI respects ourselves, respects our data, respects our privacy, and that there's transparency around what AI is and isn't doing. And the second thing was that AI is only as good as the data that feeds it. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And as we think about AI, the other thing is for AI to really work, we heard on one of the keynotes earlier about hyper-personalization. For AI to really work and to really be useful to humans, it needs to be personalized to them. Personalized to them right now, wherever they are, whatever they need. There's nothing worse than these generic agentic AI systems that has no context about what it is that you need and doesn't handle or understand state. So those two reasons got me really interested in this idea of a decentralized data economy. How are we going to reimagine the world where data is going to drive everything? And that's basically what I want to talk about today. Oh, it's not working. So some of these statements here seem fairly obvious, but the reason I wanted to call them out is because they have a fundamental impact on data and identity. So the first thing, as we already know, the world is rapidly evolving, AI is advancing, but the key thing here is the boundaries between the physical and digital worlds are blurring. So we just think something simple like, your employee badge when you get a job or when you get your student badge. What you tend to get is you'll get a physical badge, which will give you access to the building, and then you'll get a username, password, or an account, or an access token, or an identity token that you use for logging into the systems. Why do you need two separate forms of identity? Well, in the reality, as the world moves and as you want to be able to have these seamless experiences, so I might start shopping online and then I physically go into the shop and then I go back online again and I kind of want to have this seamless experience. Why shouldn't I be able, in the same way I can add things into my shopping basket online, why shouldn't I be able to add things into my shopping basket when I'm physically at the store? My virtual shopping basket. So this idea of blurring physical and digital fundamentally changes what identity and what data means. And the second thing is organizations are increasingly being challenged on how they engage with their users. They want to be more personal, they want to be more responsive, efficient, all these great things. To be able to realize this, you need to know who you're engaging with. They need to know who you are. They need to trust who you are. So this idea of trust in this digital world is something which is currently missing. There is no trust in the end. You don't know, is that website you're logging into or is that website you're connecting to really the website you think it is? One of the biggest forms of data theft and identity theft out there is, innocently enough, people going to LinkedIn or to maybe a recruitment site, applying for a job they think with a valid company, which isn't a valid company. They're sharing a lot of their information, think they're applying for a job, and that data is being taken and used for something else. Vice versa, you've got employers with people, fake identities or real identities that are then subsequently selling their data once they've actually been recruited to third-party bad actors. So trust is missing. This is obviously creating risk. We're seeing an increase in fraud, so they're hoping, how can we figure out how to decrease it? Deep fakes is a really important thing. as deepfakes increase and as it becomes cheaper to generate deepfakes, you can't even trust your lying eyes or trust your lying ears. So it's not like you can, put somebody on the screen and say, oh yeah, this is indeed the person who they claim to be. So this is also creating concerns. So what every business needs and every individual needs is access to trusted, verifiable, accurate, real-time user data. And this is where we're seeing wallet technology fundamentally changing how people think about personal data and personal identity. But not all wallets are created equal. So the really important thing here is, the reason I got into this space and the reason I feel so passionate about this is that I believe we need to put data back into the hands of the individual. They need to control their data. They need to decide who they want to share their data with. They need to be able to revoke access to their data. They need to be able to share data that is not persisted with a third party, for example. So we want to allow an individual to get greater agency over their own data. And this is what we think of when we think of a wallet in a decentralized world. We also need to ensure that data is trusted. So one of the reasons why companies, when you want to get a job, for example, or when you open up a bank account, the reason why they ask you for lots of paper, a utility bill to prove your address or an identity document to prove your identity, is because they don't trust anything that you provide. So they want you to provide the paper, and then they're going to go back and check with the original issuer of that data, that paper, to make sure that it's valid. So what we need to do in order for our wallets and our data to be usable by us in real time for different business applications, be that applying for a bank account or a credit card or getting a job, we need that data to be trustable, to be trusted. And this is where cryptographically signed verifiable credentials is the key, and we see this being adopted around the world. You may not know what's happening under the covers, but essentially, for anybody out there who may have a mobile driver's license, this is really big in the US. In Europe, we're going to be getting identity documents by the end of 2026. These will be cryptographically signed verifiable credentials. The other thing which is really important is I do not believe this is going to be one wallet to rule all wallets. This is going to be a multi-wallet world. And there's some really interesting things that have been happening in the OEM space with the likes of Android and iOS that I think is making this multi-wallet world real fast. And the other thing is interoperability. We really need to ensure that our wallets, the data that is contained in the wallets is interoperable. And so that, for example, if I get my mobile driver's license out of California, when I come and travel to Europe and I want to rent a car, I can use my mobile driver's license to prove that I have a valid driving license. So how many people have heard of decentralized identity? So not that many, actually. So you probably don't know these myths. But for anybody who has heard of decentralized identity, what they frequently think about it as being about blockchain. It is not about blockchain. It is not a single technology. It is really more of a concept. It's an architecture, and I would even argue it's a philosophy. Do we believe individuals should have ownership and agency over their own data? So that's what it is. It can be implemented through a variety of different technologies. So during COVID, I'm not sure if Slovakia did, but I know in Ireland we did, and most countries in Europe had things like COVID passes, proof of vaccination or proof of negative COVID tests. And most countries, except for, I think, maybe one or two, most of them were decentralized, which means that it was a cryptographically signed document that you could have on paper with a QR code or you could have on your phone. And that allowed you to share peer-to-peer that proof with a third party when you go into a restaurant or a bar or something like that. And that was not implemented using blockchain. That was implemented with the EU Gateway, which was more of a traditional PKD, public key directory system. So you can implement this with many different types of technologies. I've implemented this using blockchain, and I've implemented this in systems that don't use blockchain. They both work. The critical thing, obviously, if you're doing blockchain, you never put PI on the chain, as everybody knows. That's the cardinal sin. The critical thing here, though, as well, is it has to be open standards based, because the whole point of decentralized identity is to allow these identity documents or these digital documents to be usable across a broad network. So they have to be open standards based. And the good news is most of these standards are now kind of finalizing. Some of them already finalized, and they're getting broad adoption. And I'll show you some of the adoption numbers later on. The other thing is, now this is slightly unintuitive, but decentralized identity is not just identity. And that's why I often hate the word decentralized identity, but unfortunately there's not another good term that everybody recognizes, because it's really any digital document that you might have cryptographically signed. So it could be a passport, it could be a driving license, it could be a degree credential. When you leave the university, you get your degree. It's really this highly trusted digital document that you can subsequently share with a third party. And also the other thing is it's not all decentralized. It is the other unintuitive thing. Because this is the thing that freaks out a lot of companies when they think of, oh my God, especially governments, oh my God, I can't be decentralized, I don't want to have a mess, I control my citizen identities. If I'm issuing a passport, the passport office is the single issuer of passports. It's centralized. That isn't a problem. Decentralization is more about how you use the data. So if you get issued an e-passport on your phone, you want to be able to share that data in a privacy-preserving, minimally disclosing way with third parties in a decentralized fashion. So decentralization is more about the presentation of these credentials than it is about the issuing of them. Obviously, they need to issue them to be able to be decentralized. So just to emphasize the centralized model versus the decentralized. So in the centralized model that we're all familiar with today, because this is how the world works for the most part today, is the user is effectively on the sideline when data exchange happens. We might, for example, give a company, we're all sick of checking consent agreements where we don't actually read what the consent agreement says. So what we do is we consent to share our data with the third party. And then on the small print, we don't realize that actually they in turn may be selling that data onto another third party and to another third party. And even if we're aware of that, so we might, for example, give our hospital consent to share our health data with an employer because maybe they needed to know something about our health. Or we might need to share it with the insurance company, as an example, if we're getting life assurance. So we might even know, but we're still not involved in the data that's exchanged. We don't actually know how much data got exchanged, what got exchanged, when it got exchanged, was it persisted by the receiving party. So we have very little visibility, we're kind of on the sideline. And this is a challenge, particularly if we believe in this digital society, where more and more data is going to be driving business processes, which means more of our data is going to be flowing around the world. And I don't think any of us want to be on the sideline for something as critical as our data, which effectively is going to be, I would argue, we carry around, other parts of our body. Our data is going to be effectively, it's an extension of our brain. So we need to be having it around with us. So this is kind of why we really, really see having the user at the center is critical. Having the user at the center doesn't mean it has to be inefficient. A lot of people say, if the user has to accept everything, they've got enough to do already. It's not about the user having to accept every single time data is requested from a third party. You can choose, for example, that whenever somebody's asking for proof of age and it's not disclosing any PII, so with things like zero knowledge proofs, you can do a presentation exchange, or with predicates that just proves you're over 21 but doesn't share any personal information about you. You might decide, I'm always happy to accept that. I'm happy to give that back to companies. You might be happy to automatically accept your employer can ask the following questions and only the following questions. So it's really about control and agency. And from a company standpoint, the other critical value here is that you get access to real-time, accurate data. Because, for example, let's just use opening up a bank account and you give your address. The second you've given your address and they've copied it into their MDM, the Master Data Management System, it's starting to get stale. And the next thing, if you move house or whatever, you now have to ring up everybody that has your address and get them to change the address. But the reality is they didn't need to hold your address information. The only reason they need your address information is if they want to send you a letter, or they might have a regulatory requirement where they need to confirm that every account holder has an address in the country for some reason. In that case, all they need to be able to do is to be able to ping your wallet. So actually, all they really need to have is to have your wallet address. And that way, if they need your physical address, or they need a confirmation that your visa is still valid, or they need some other information for you to confirm, they can just ping your wallet and ask you to share it. And now they guarantee they always have the correct address when they need it. So this is really changing how businesses interact with humans, interact with people. It's making it more personal. Whether we want to be more personal with companies is another question, but the reality is, they're being personal with us behind our back in many cases. They know a lot of things about us that we don't realize. So I think I would rather know what sort of personal relationship I have with these organizations. So the key benefits of the decentralized approach is, and I didn't call out the peer-to-peer, but this is really important as well. One of the things that's really nice, and I'm going to do a little demo. I was going to do it live, but because of time, I've just done a small recording. It's only about 2.5, 3 minutes of a demo. But one of the key benefits of this decentralized approach is that you can actually exchange data peer-to-peer. So what that means is, if, for example, we'll do your employee credential. So if I have my proof of employment credential on my device in my wallet, and I need to use that to log into a system, I can do that. I can use it. I can use my phone to connect and to verify my identity. And I'm going to show you this when I'm physically logging into an IT system. But if I'm going into a building and I need to verify my identity, I can also use the same digital credential to verify my identity using either NFC or Bluetooth and connection. So the only trick is here is if you're doing it in a physical world, you want it to be really, really fast. You want to basically instantaneously or close to be able to get verification. The last thing you need is to be able to you're waiting to get in through a gate, and then it has to go up to the internet, has to go check something, and eventually comes back to you and lets you in. So peer-to-peer is really important in the real world, and particularly also when you want to do things like think about offline. There's a really wonderful example of one country, and I'm not going to say which one it was, in Europe during COVID. It did a centralized approach, and what happened is it was an airport and they had a router issue, and the airport couldn't connect to the internet. So all of a sudden, nobody could get on a plane because nobody's COVID passes could be verified because they actually lost internet connection for 30 minutes or something. Now that was a catastrophic for the airport, but it just really reinforced the reason why we need to be really robust in terms of how we allow credentials to be exchanged. Privacy preserving is another really important characteristic of decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity, where you can issue presentation requests that do not actually disclose everything, disclose a minimal amount of information. So proof of age is a good example, where you don't even disclose any name information, anything, just proof that somebody is over a particular age. And then obviously globally interoperable is critical to make this thing work. And the final thing I wanted to point out is obviously the cryptography is clear. You know, you're cryptographically signing these documents, so they're immutable, they're verifiable. The other thing is biometrics. Biometrics freaks everybody the heck out, and for good reason. One of the other things that's really attractive about this decentralized approach is that you can allow step-up biometric checks without the third party, the relying party, holding and persisting your biometrics. So for example, when you get a mobile driver's license in the US, inside that mobile driver's license is your image. It's cryptographically signed. It's the same thing when you, for example, you go through the security gates at the airport, you know, the ones that check your passport and your image. Your image is embedded in the chip in the passport, or in an MDL, it's embedded in the verifiable credential on your phone. When you need to biometric check, all you need to do is obviously check a liveness check that the person standing in front of the device take a selfie of that and compare that image to the image on the credential. So you don't need the third party to hold that data and say, yep, I know for sure this is Marie. The credential that's been issued to Marie's device holds the biometrics, holds the image, and that's where it needs to stay. So there's some really attractive characteristics around having this decentralized approach, particularly when you look at biometrics. And as much as we hate biometrics, there's many reasons. I'm going to show you some use cases why we're going to increasingly see the use of biometrics, particularly because of deep fakes where you can't trust your eyes. Biometrics is one of the ways that you can ensure the person at the other side of the screen is indeed who they said they are. So just what are the key roles within this decentralized data exchange? So you have the data issuer, so that might be a government, it could be an employer, it could be an airline issuing a boarding pass. You have the device holder, which is the person, so that might be an employee, a traveler, a citizen, a student. And then you have the relying party who consumes the data. So this could be government, it could be a retailer, it could be a bank. I kind of went through some of these benefits already, and I'm just conscious of time, so maybe I'll just be very quick here. But so as I indicated, the data issue has some real benefits. There's increased utility of data, because let's think about it. We've been having some conversations with telcos. So telcos have a lot of really valuable information about individuals as part of their, what they do when they're managing your account. And the question we've asked, well, wouldn't it be useful? A telco is generally very well trusted. They have trusted identity. If they could release some of that data back to you. So, for example, if they could issue, obviously they issue identity data back to you, proof of your mobile number, so you never have to prove, get a text message to prove that this is your telephone number. But also things like, they know that you pay your bill, so things like that. So that way then if you wanted to rent an apartment, instead of having to rely on credit scores or things like that, that is sometimes a little bit of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, you can get trusted, like utility companies, it's the same thing. Utility companies have trusted address information, they have trusted, payment information, they know you always pay your bills. That's valuable information. If I had it, I could use that for other purposes. So there's greater utility of the data if you give it to the person. Give me my data and I'll make it useful. So data utility is important. The risk of fraud is obviously reduced. You've got improved data protection, because the other benefit here, as I indicated, is when if in today's world, in the centralized world, if I'm renting a car, and Hertz, for example, want to check my driving license, they have to go back to the issuer of the driving license. So we call it call home. So they have to call back home. So they have to integrate with that third party, and that data provider then has to have an API on the internet so that people can query their data. That obviously is a risk. It's a security risk. Wouldn't it be much better if I could completely close down all my enterprise APIs? I throw my driving license over the fence to the person and put it on their phone, and then all the verification happens without ever anybody having to go to my central system. So it really, really improves security. And obviously it grows adoption as well, because it's so much easier, as you'll see in a few minutes, it's so much easier for aligned parties to engage with the wallet than it is if they have to integrate with a bazillion different enterprise APIs. So effectively, the wallet becomes the API of me, my API for my data that I control. The device holder, obviously, increased privacy and control. It's fast and convenient. Now my data can work for me. I can use it whenever I need to use it. So I get increased utility, and it keeps me safe as well, because I can minimize what I'm sharing with people, and I can know exactly what somebody's asking me for, and I can also verify to make sure that the person asking me for my data is indeed who they say they are. So text messages and emails is the worst way to get data requests, because nobody knows who they really are. Whereas with this type of cryptographic connection between a wallet and an organization, it's a much more trusted way to exchange data. And then the aligned party, they minimize their PII burden because, again, as I mentioned with the address, they don't need to store some of this information. It streamlines processes because now they have a digital way of interacting with the wallet and getting data. Can reduce fraud. Gives you a consistent user experience across modalities. So I'm using the same type of credentials with the same experience when I'm physically there and online. And a lower integration burden. So I'm just going to do a quick demo. It's about 3 minutes. It's a video, so I'll quickly talk through it. It's a project we did with a company called NTT Digital. NTT Digital is a large telco in Japan, the #1 telco in Japan. And they're also the second largest data center provider in the world. They run the bare metal that Microsoft and AWS and Google run on. So they're a big infrastructure company, and they're really, really interested in this idea of universal wallet infrastructure. So this is a project built out of the lab here in Bratislava. So one thing I didn't mention, and I see 3 of our guys in front of me, or four of our guys in front of me, but our development team is based here in Bratislava. So this was built by them. And let me just quickly, what I'm going to show you is three particular aspects. One is the credential issuance process. In this demo, it's a DMV. So in the US is really leaning into this, and a lot of US states are issuing mobile driver's licenses, which are ISO MDOCs, which are verifiable credentials. So this particular demo, it's simulating the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. I'm going to request my mobile driver's license. I'm going to get my mobile driver's license, and then I'm going to use that credential to verify my identity online when I'm renting a car, and I'm also going to verify it in person when I want to get into a bar or when I get stopped by the police for speeding. So that's what we're going to show. So we're quickly, about 3 minutes. So the first step here is on my phone, I go and click on Bedrock. So this is the website for the simulated DMV. And I'm going to go and request to get my driving license. In this example, there's a login for accessing the website, but you don't necessarily have to have that. So in this case, it's the standard username and password login. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the issuing processes. So this is a deep link. The get started is a deep link. If I was going to this website on my laptop, it would be a QR code that I would scan from my phone, from my wallet. But in this case, because I opened it on my device, it's going to automatically open my wallet as a deep link. It's going to go through an IDV process because clearly when you're issuing a mobile driver's license, I need to be sure the person is who they said they are. This is when I'm doing the biometric unlocking of my phone, and now I'm starting the process of image capture. So the first step here is, I think you've probably all done this, is the standard you capture an image. Because what they want to do is make sure you're a real person, not a deep fake, and they want to make sure that the photo here is the same photo as on the driving license. So they're going to do an image comparison. So we scan the front and the back of the license. The back service will analyze that it is a valid license. So you do forensic analysis on the document. Then you extract the text and the image elements. And then you compare the image with the selfie you just took. And then you issue the mobile driver's license to the device. And then you delete all the data once you're done. So the data doesn't get persisted on the back-end service. This is just showing me the elements so I can make sure all the data is correct. And now I should have a mobile driver's license in actually I'll go through this step next, and then I accept the driving license. So now I will have a mobile driver's license on my phone. Now what we're going to do, and you can see the elements. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use that for online, for in-person, and then we're going to do remote. So first of all is in-person. So here I have two phones. The left one is the Verifier app. Again, it's a mobile app. What it does is essentially it sends a presentation request to the phone. So there's a number of different profiles. So depending on what you're asking, there's less information. So this over 21 is only proving you're over 21 and it's showing your portrait image. It's not showing any other personal information. And then if you're reviewing your driver's license, it will obviously show all the elements. So now what's going to happen is I will open up on my phone, I will open up my driving license, and I will open up a share QR, which opens up a QR code generator. So that is going to generate the QR code. And then the Verify app is just going to scan it. So they'll just scan the QR code. That will issue a presentation request. So here you can see it asked for a few elements. I unlock my phone to verify I'm still in possession of my phone. And you can see the elements that were shared, just the proof of age and the image. And then this is going to quickly run through another example where in this case it's going to ask all your driving license elements. So it's kind of the same process, but you can see more of the driving license elements. So this is just indicates that this is a really, really fast way. You can do this with NFC as well, but I just did it with the QR code as an example. So now let's do exactly the same thing, but on a website. So again, and this is what I meant about the same experience. In this case, I'm going to a website. The Share My MDL is again a deep link. It's going to automatically open up my wallet and send me a presentation request. I'm going to accept it if I'm happy. I'll accept that, and then it's going to exchange the data with the website. The same verification happens. I'm unlocking my phone here. And now the data is going to be shared with the website. So now you've had exactly the same experience, whether you were in person or whether you were online. And this data is, and you knew exactly what was being shared. You knew the purpose by which it was being shared. So I'm just taking longer than I realised. So sorry, apologies for this, guys. Adoption. I wanted to quickly talk about adoption because this is really happening. So in the last year, I was here last year, things have changed significantly. We're now seeing market estimates from the analysts, anything between 500 billion and 1.1 trillion in size by 2034. About 500 million users by 2026 will have wallets in their hands that are exchanging verifiable credentials. Open standards are maturing, so that's the good news. The big ones we're seeing is the ISO spec for MDLs, mobile driver's licenses, and MDocs. That's been now broadly used across the world. We're seeing the ITF JOSH, the SD JOSH that Europe is using along with the ISO. OIDC, so the OpenID Connect, so OIDC, VCI, and VP, those are actually now being broadly adopted. So we're really seeing the standards maturing and people are actually implementing to those standards. We see the governments are now regulating this type of decentralized, privacy-preserving credentialing of data. So we've seen even in the US, with the Real ID Act, now accepts MDLs for any flights within the US. 2024, we see Austros, that's Australia, so they've announced their digital trust service, and Queensland already has rolled out ISO MDLs, and some of the other provinces or states are going to be doing the same thing. Obviously in Europe, we ratified our EIDAS v2 in 2024. By the end of 2026, we are all going to have the option to have one of these wallets in our hand with a government-issued ID. And 6 months, I believe, after that, some of the private sector businesses like banks are going to be forced to accept identities directly from wallets. So they cannot ask us to prove our identity using physical documents if we have a wallet with the identity document in the wallet. So it's now starting to kind of drive adoption in a really big way across all of Europe. And then organizations are adopting. And I wanted to quickly run on specifically, I just think there's some interesting movements been happening around, say, Apple and Google, Samsung, but we're also seeing the likes of Uber and Amazon have announced, I don't know if you've just noticed that with Uber recently, it just happened to be for the first time last night, they now have a verified ID capability where they verify your ID when you're getting an Uber. But they're now starting to adopt MDLs. They just announced it about a month ago, and it just went live 2 weeks ago. Amazon is doing the same thing for alcohol beverage purchases in the US. We obviously see IATA, the travel association, looking at this. And then obviously we see the likes of Glyph in the organizational identities getting some real traction. Just quickly on the OEMs, I think one thing that's really interesting here is there's a few things. One is Google have integrated the W3C Digital Credential API into Chromium. The Chromium project. So this means all of the main browsers now have the ability to send presentation requests to your wallet on your device. And the second thing they've done, which is really interesting, both Apple and Google now have this in the latest version of their operating systems, is when I as a relying party send a presentation request to a device, they effectively federate it on the device. So that means that you can really have multiple wallets. So for example, if a relying party sends a request to verify a driving license that might be in the OEM wallet, and they also want to generate your proof of employment that might be in your company wallet, the phone will be able to figure both of them out. It will give you an option to choose which wallet you want to take the data from, and then you can share it back with the relying party. So this really does create a multi-wallet world. Now, with that said, I'm actually going to, I don't know, do the slides get made available to the audience? Because I have some use cases, but I don't think I'm going to have time to go through them. So I think what I'm going to do is we'll go directly, because I'm just conscious we've only a few minutes left, or we have to do the Q&A. So maybe, are there any questions? Well, okay, so let me just continue. There's only one question, I'm just going to continue. Because, so in the EU, so something for us all to be proud of, the Europeans in the room. And I know we're not often proud of a lot, but we should really be proud of Europe. Europe is leading the way in this decentralized identity movement. I think it's really important. We have spent billions in all of these like large-scale pilots to really prove out the value of individuals owning and having agency over their own data. We don't do everything perfect, but I think what we're doing here is really important for society. And we're seeing other countries, moving this direction. Very often speak with other countries around the world, and they all look to what Europe is doing. So I think we should all be really proud that we are taking some leadership in this space. And particularly by the end of this year, by the end of 2026, once we all have wallets and we're starting to see them becoming really useful, I think that's going to generate a whole slew of innovation in Europe. We're seeing lots of interesting startups looking to do stuff in this space. And I just wanted to spend 4 minutes, and then we'll have 2 minutes for the one question that's there. I just wanted to kind of give you some flavor of the types of use cases that we're seeing. In-person to remote. We have some of the large technology providers that recognize, even though there's risk of having remote employees, and obviously having people physically come into the office is nice, they realize they just can't get the skills, particularly in the AI space. They cannot get the skills in the locations they are. So they need to accept the reality that they need to have remote. Some of the best AI guys are probably here in Bratislava, and companies have to be willing to get those best guys wherever they physically live, which means that in order to avoid bad actors, getting jobs and then trying to steal IP, they really need a way to know that, yeah, this is indeed Marie Wallace is at the other side of the machine. So we're seeing increasing use cases around employers that when you log into systems, they don't want to check you biometrically every time, but maybe once every so often check, Marie, are you still in ownership of this machine? Do you still have this laptop? Because we want to just be sure it's you. You haven't checked in a while. So what we're seeing is step-up authentication where they want to be able to check that you are indeed Marie. We see the same use case in financial services where you might not have to do a biometric check if you're transferring $500, but if you want to transfer $50,000, you may want to do it, which I think all of us would agree. I want to make sure somebody doesn't steal my machine and then transfer $50,000 to somewhere they shouldn't. We see recruitment as another interesting use case. We did an experiment about a year ago in Accenture where we gave new recruits in the US the option to onboard using a wallet with where they could do an IDV, get verified identity credential. They could go to the National Student Clearinghouse, we partnered with them, and they could get their degree credential on their device, and then they could start the onboarding process using these verifiable credentials. And it went from, I think it was like, hours to minutes, the turnaround time, because obviously with a verifiable credential you can verify it really fast. So I think we really proved out in that even experiment that this has a significant saving, and also the great thing is it puts the person in control of their own data. And then the fraud scenario is the other thing. We've seen increasing areas with deep fakes. And actually what we're starting to see now is we're starting to see some of the video chat sites are starting to integrate verifiable credentials so that you can get a blue check mark to say, yes, this is indeed the CEO of the company, and it's not a deep fake telling you to transfer 20 million into some other account, which has happened. We know this has happened. So these are just some of the ways that we're seeing the idea of verifiable credentials and wallet technology transform how businesses operate today. And with that said, what was the question? Oh, we have more than one question now. I can't actually read the questions from this angle, but yeah, if you can, that would be great. Yeah, so this is a really good point. So one of the things that the government, there's a few things that there's a combination here. There's technology, but there's also regulation. And one of the things I think that is really good that Europe has done really well, it's taken us a long time to get here, but we have put all the regulations in place we put in as much of the regulation in place as we can to protect the user. So for example, not any wallet can just basically come onto the network and say, I'm going to hold verifiable credentials. So you have to so there's a few things. You have to verify the issuer. So you need to know it's a valid issuer. So there's an onboarding process within the trust fabric or the trust ecosystem for Europe. So the issuer needs to be verified. The relying party needs to be verified. So when I get a ping to my wallet, I know indeed, I can check their certificate. I say, yep, it definitely is Accenture asking me for this information. And the device, the technology companies also need to be verified. So that they need to be certified that they follow and they meet whatever, the technology requirements. And the EU has an architectural reference framework and they have a set of standards that need to be adopted. So does that mean that you can't have bad actors? Obviously you can always have bad actors, but there's a lot of checks and balances to make it difficult for bad actors to get in. And then if they do get into the network, to kick them off as quickly as possible. Yeah, so that's a good. So the Open Wallet Foundation, and I sit on the board of the Open Wallet Foundation. The goal of OWF is to make these open source projects available broadly, and to have kind of consistent governance and management around these open source projects. So we do indeed have some of the developers of the EU wallet architecture are actually members of OWF and indeed leveraging OWF projects. So for example, Scatalas, I know, is active in OWS, and I know they did one of the open source implementations for EU Wallet. I know things like Multipass. So Google has released the Multipass verifier component into the Open Wallet Foundation, and I know it's being used by a number of the European companies that are part of the EU project. So the reality is, I'm not sure if any of the reference implementations are yet part of the OWF. I need to find out, but I do know that the OWF is working very closely with a lot of these companies that are building these EU reference implementations. So 30 seconds. So if there's no other questions left, I'm going to finish. That was a whistle-stop run through what's happening, but hopefully it was useful. And next year, if I'm here next year, I think a lot of us will have wallets in our hands, hopefully, because I think come the middle of the year, we're going to see. I think Italy, some of the countries have already released their wallets, but definitely by this time next year, I think a lot of us may have wallets in our hands already. So we might actually do a live demo. So thank you very much.